but of course, my button that displays my screen is not working, so I'm going to read the disclaimer. The disclaimer for this session is the Indiana Consortium of State and Human Rights agencies on this presentation upholding civil and human rights in Indiana and the Midwest. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists and are not necessarily the opinion of this organization or its participants. The use of this webinar in whole or in part without express permission of the Indiana Consortium is strictly prohibited. Thank you. So let's get started. We're going to start with the introductions. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Ronald Mullins, and good morning, everyone. I'm the chairperson of the Hammond Human Relations Commission located in Hammond, Indiana, and the treasurer of the Indiana Consortium of State and Human Rights Agencies. I'll be hosting today's live streaming event entitled Upholding Civil and Human Rights in Indiana, in the Midwest region, brought to you by the Indiana Consortium of State and Human Rights Agencies. Since 1972, the Indiana Consortium, composed of all civil rights and human rights enforcement agencies across the state of Indiana, has been hosting meetings, training, and serving as a platform for discussing statewide human and civil rights policies and initiatives. It is our pleasure to continue acting as a source for information to the general public on civil and human rights topics. Today joining me on this panel for discussion of various executive orders and laws impacting civil rights and human rights in Indiana, along with other important topics, we have renowned Professor Sheila Schultz Kennedy, Kevin Brown, and Luis Fuentes Rohr from the University of Indiana. We also have civil rights advocates and former Indiana NAACP attorney Barbara Boland, former mayor of the city of Gary, and the first African-American female mayor in the state of Indiana, Karen Freeman-Wilson, director of the Indiana ACLU, Chris Daly, and Dr. Vanessa Allen McLeod of the Northwest Indiana Urban League. Now we turn our attention to our first panelist, Professor Sheila Schultz Kennedy, Attorney Barbara Brown, and Professor Kevin Brown. Would you please give a brief introduction of yourself? One thing I like to notice is that I have a little bell here, which I got on the Polar Express with my godson. If you go over your time, I'll ring it. So please don't let me ring the bell. I'm not gonna sing the song ring the bell, but this is what I'll ring if you go over your time. So let's keep this professional, as I am. Would you please, whoever wants to go first can go first.
I'll go first. My name's Sheila Cease Kennedy. I am a retired professor of law and public policy at Indiana University at the School of Public and Environmental Affairs. Prior to that, I also spent 6 years as executive director of Indiana's ACLU. And by profession, I was a lawyer, but I have recovered.
I guess I'll go next.
Okay, Attorney
Okay.
Boland.
Yeah, before going any further, I want to thank the Indiana Consortium of State and Local Human Rights Agencies for the invitation, especially acknowledging President Yvonne Thompson and Director Hanifa Khalid. I am Barbara Bowling Williams, a native of Gary, Indiana. I earned my bachelor's degree from GMI, now known as Kettering University, and my law degree from Valparaiso University School of Law. I am committed to serving my community, with community being broadly and narrowly defined from local to state and national organizations. My work with National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, includes 6 years as Gary Branch president, 20 years as Indiana State Conference president, and 12 years on the National NAACP Board of Directors. I'm a member of First Baptist Church, where I serve on the trustee board, the Betsy Griggs Mission, and the altar. I also serve on the board of MWN, Multicultural Wellness Network, a member of the James C. Kimbrough Bar Association, and a 50-year proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. As a practicing attorney for the past 30 years, I am especially proud to have served on a couple legal teams that I'll be talking later about some of the work that we did. And having been taught at an early age, to whom much is given, much is required, I believe the only thing necessary for evil to succeed is for men and women of good conscience to do nothing and say nothing. Good morning.
Thank you. Professor Brown.
Hi, and I too want to thank the commission for giving me this chance to speak with you. I was on the faculty of Indiana University Myers School of Law from January 1987 to June 30, 2022. Then I joined the University of South Carolina School of Law as the Mitchell Willoughby Distinguished Professor on July 1, 2022. I grew up in Indianapolis, attended North Central High School, Indiana University, where I majored in accounting, and graduated from Yale Law School in 1982. I've been a visiting professor at law schools at the University of Texas, Alabama, Illinois, and San Diego, as well as the School of Transnational Law at Peking University in Shenzhen, China, and the London Law School Consortium. I've been affiliated with law faculties in South Africa, Nicaragua, Kazakhstan, and India. And I've spoken on issues of race, education, and diversity, and the global impact of the African-American struggle over 400 times, including at the annual convention of the NAACP, the Congressional Black Caucus Brain Trust meetings, the National Bar Association, the American Bar Association, and the justices of the Indiana Supreme Court. I've spoken at several leading law schools and universities, including Harvard, Columbia, NYU, Duke, Virginia, Cornell, and Texas, and several overseas universities, including Oxford, the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, the University of Mumbai, Delhi, and Pune, all in India, the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and Al Quds University outside of Jerusalem. As a original participant of the Critical Race Theory Workshop in Madison, Wisconsin in 1989, for the past 39 years, my primary research interests are in the areas of race law and education and transnational inequality. I've published 2 books and over 90 articles or comments on issues that are relevant to the Black community in the U.S., and my current book project is tentatively entitled Caste Comparisons, Connections of the Liberation Movements in India and the United States, and will be published by Cambridge University Press late next year.
Thank you. Professor Kennedy, Professor Brown, and Attorney Bowen, we're going to get started. From your perspectives, which legislation measures undertaken by this administration have caused the greatest harm, and also on the other side, generate the most positive outcome pertaining to civil and human rights? Please limit your time to 15 minutes. This is a jump ball. You can go any way you want to, but please be mindful of my bell.
Okay.
Who wants to go first?
I'll start.
Yes, ma'am.
From my standpoint, virtually everything that has been done by this administration has been harmful, not positive. And it couldn't have done those things without the cowardly acquiescence of the legislature. And these measures have been incredibly harmful to civil rights, civil liberties, and the Constitution. I think citizens are just now beginning to understand the multiple harms that have been done by so many of the president's legislative initiatives, and especially his executive orders, which come daily, evidently. I know that Professor Brown is going to talk about the big, beautiful bill, which has terrible implications for us. But far worse, in my opinion, have been the unrelenting assaults on wokeness and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, at both the state and federal levels. I mean, here in Indiana, culture warriors like Indiana's Attorney General Todd Rokita are running around asserting that good faith efforts to level the civic playing field are really the first discrimination against straight white men. That's a patently false excuse for what is really a vendetta against equal rights for women and minorities. And it gets worse every day. I will cede my time to Professor Brown.
Thank you, Professor Kennedy. Professor Brown?
Well, let me jump in here too, because there's so many places I could jump in. The international implications of what's happening to the United States overseas. If you look at the money that we've cut from USAID that is used to support health initiatives throughout the world, that have saved something like 90 million lives over the last 30 years, anticipations are the cuts are going to lead to an additional 14 million people dying overseas because of those cuts. But if you want a stark comparison between Democrats and Republicans, look at the big, beautiful bill and contrast that with Joe Biden's Build Back Better bill. When I've had friends who've come to me and said, look, well, what's the difference between the Democratic administration and the Republican administration? And I point to that comparison. So think of the big, beautiful bill that just passed, $4.4 trillion. $3 trillion will be borrowed, and $1 trillion will come from cuts from Medicaid and what used to be the food stamps program. So that in that bill, let me just give you some figures. The estimates are that the top 1% of Americans will walk away with an additional $300,000 a year. The top 20%, $13,000 a year. But if you're at the bottom, if you're below 18,000, you're actually going to lose 1% because you're going to lose Medicaid coverage. If you're talking about 18,000 to 53,000, you'll get an extra $30 a year. And indeed, if you're talking about 53,000 to 96,000, only an additional $1,400 a year. So you can see how this is really scaled to benefit those who are the wealthiest, and as I said, at the expense of those at the bottom. Whereas if you contrast that with Joe Biden's Build Back Better bill, his bill had over $400 billion for child care and pre-K programs. It would have added another 4 million people in coverage on Medicaid, as opposed to losing 14 million under the Build Back Better bill. So this is all going to be very detrimental for low-income individuals. And I'm not even talking about climate change. Now, the president yesterday called climate change the greatest hoax ever. We must hope that he is true, because effectively he's dismantling all of the policies and programs that we put together to fight global warming as created by human interaction. And let me just stop there, because I can probably keep going on and on. But I, like Professor Kennedy, I don't see much positive to talk about.
Well, thank you, Professor Brown. Excuse me, Attorney Boland.
Yes, I guess for me, I believe that what has caused the greatest harm and continues to do so, it's not new in this administration. Other administrations have continued to do this, is the current attacks on voting rights. Your vote is your voice. Access to the polls, such as reducing the number of voting locations, reducing the number of hours, the method of registration, no mail-in ballots, no same-day registration, no assistance by independent community organizers, attempts to silence young voters by denying them the use of campus IDs as valid identifiers when they try to vote, or finding ways to challenge citizenship. Vote dilution, such as gerrymandering, redistricting, process drowning out your voice is your choice, rigging the maps. Then I look at the reduction and elimination of educational opportunity, cuts to funding, higher education, scholarships, censorships, brainwashing, predetermined what a child learns, who controls the purse strings controls, cuts to programs that recognize that children, people add value to this world, as the whole individual is nurtured, environmental. That was just brought up a minute ago. Absolutely. We are stewards of this planet, and we do with our limited resources have an effect on all of us. Toxics are spewed into the water, soil, and air, and that affects us all. Devaluing one community over another, placing toxic effects in marginalized communities to bear the brunt of harm for their health mortality. Yes, I know that sounds again like it's a doomsday, but I am an optimist, and so I did find the positive. The positive outcome is that people are recognizing that they have power and are now beginning to take their power back, unifying, adding your voice to others, remembering the foundational principles and holding those powers to those principles. We cannot have a game-changing conversation, movement, if you will, without truth. Truth has to be the foundation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So as long as we hold true to what we said in our Constitution, I see that we can turn this around.
Thank you. That is my stopwatch. Thank you very much for your information. Attorney Boland. The next topic, considering the flow of information, have any of you observed any bias in the manner in which information gets disseminated in Indiana to Indiana residents and the impact on the statewide agenda? Again, 15 minutes, please. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Mm.
You know, I think I have frequently said, and I do believe, that much of the political problems that we face right now are due to the information environment that we inhabit. And yes, there's a lot of misinformation and propaganda out there, but I think the biggest problem is stemming from the loss of our newspapers that once served a general community. Today's information environment is so fragmented. We aren't all getting the same news. We aren't all living in the same reality. And that fragmentation allows people to choose the news that confirms their original biases. That's assuming that they're consuming any news at all. Both nationally and locally, there are so many multiple choices, multiple sources for propaganda and information and alternative facts. You know, I used to tell my students that if they really believed that the aliens landed in Roswell, I could find them 5 internet sites with pictures of the aliens. You know, if that's what you want to do, is if your research is to go out and find confirmation of the things that you believe should be true, it makes it impossible to make to piggyback on Ms. Bowling's point. It makes it impossible to know what is true and what is not true. And you know, that the recent very cowardly submission to Trump's bullying of news networks like CBS and Disney just exacerbate the problem. On one hand, on the other hand, however, there have been recent entries into the local media to supplement our long-standing bad newspaper, the Indianapolis Star. And here in Indianapolis, we've got new entrants into that market, including the Mirror, which it does a very good job, I think, the Capitol Chronicle, the Indiana Citizen, which I very much recommend, and a couple of others. And that's a hopeful sign, but again, it's fragmented.
Thank you.
Let me jump in on this, and I want to point to the attack on experts. Take someone like me, right? I've spent 40 years researching, writing about race, writing about ethnicity, writing about discrimination. And take COVID. We know that 1 million Americans died as a result of COVID. But there are estimates that between 5 and 10 million people were saved from dying in the United States because of the vaccines, because of the quick action. And indeed, some of that quick action was taken by the Trump administration. But yet there's a sense that COVID was a big failure and that we overreacted. And the sense that people are saying we overreacted is simply because the experts were good at their job and not as many Americans died. And I think that's one of the other problems about information. You have people who have studied these problems for their entire lives, and yet their expertise is being compared to the expertise of some recent blogger who's jumped on the internet with their own blog post in the last couple of years. And that's a dangerous development, because it means that you're not able to tell what advice is really advice worthy of following and what advice is not.
Well, if I may add to that, we are coming out of a time that has continually assaulted and discounted expertise. It's all of a sudden, if you know what you're talking about, you're an elitist, and that has permeated this. So I'm.
And I guess I'm looking at it from the standpoint that it says what information gets disseminated to Indiana residents. And we are a state that is surrounded and bordered by 4 other states: Illinois, Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan. Those closest to those borders oftentimes will not have access to what is occurring in our state. And we understand that that all politics are local. So we must know what's happening here in the state of Indiana, and certainly what's happening in our state legislature. News sources have a tendency to focus on the news across the state lines. For an example, Northwest Indiana gets Chicago news. We don't know what's happening. When Professor talked about the news sources in Indianapolis, we've not heard of those. Of course, we've heard of the Indianapolis Reporter, but that's about it. And I think that's because of my working around the state that I'm familiar with it. But I don't hear any reference to the Indiana Reporter here up in Northwest Indiana. And so it's rare that news from Indianapolis is shared with us. And when my members in other parts of the state do not personally contact me at that time directly to inform me of a situation viewing in their community, I would have no idea what's going on. I was passing through and I heard somebody say, well, there was a shooting here in Indianapolis today. And I'm like, there was? No, we didn't hear about that up here. However, in recent years, the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus has made a concerted effort to travel around the state, hosting town halls to inform Hoosiers about the current laws that were being enacted and preparing to take effect. Some legislators, such as Representative Greg Porter, disseminates a publication, and Senator Mark Spencer issues a newsletter. So those are 2 people who I know have been proactive in making sure that Hoosiers in all parts of the state gain an understanding and knowledge of what's going on down there in our state capital.
Thank you very much. You guys have been very mindful of the time limit. If I had gold stars, I would give you each a gold star. So let's try this once more time with Professor Kennedy. You have published many papers and books. In your paper, Civil Ignorance in Democratic Accountability, you state the lack of civil participation may be contributed to the low levels of understanding of basic American government. What solutions do you offer, and how should they be both achieved? And if you could limit yourself to 10 minutes, thank you.
I'll be happy to. As I wrote in that paper, scholars attribute the erosion of American democracy to three interrelated causes: ignorance of politics and governance, the growth of inequality, very much including civic inequality and informational asymmetries, and a resurgent tribalism. And when I say tribalism, I am talking about racism and white nationalism, sexism, homophobia, religious bigotry, the urban-rural divide. And all of that factors into something that is becoming more troublesome: political identity. Civic ignorance complicates the interactions between citizens and their government, and it exacerbates inequality because citizens who understand how the political system works are advantaged in a number of ways over people who don't, including their ability to understand when elected officials are violating their oath to uphold the Constitution. Americans' widespread ignorance of the basics of our Constitution and legal system have greatly facilitated the growth of disinformation and propaganda. It's allowed the current administration to obscure the fact that many of Trump's numerous executive orders aren't only inconsistent with democratic norms, but are at odds with the Constitution. I mean, the most obvious was probably his attack on birthright citizenship, which is explicitly set out in the 14th Amendment. You can't eliminate birthright citizenship with an executive order. It would require a constitutional amendment. But we have a president who has never encountered either the Declaration or the Constitution, and certainly not the Bill of Rights. But again, citizens who know what the 14th Amendment says would have understood that immediately. And there are lots of other examples. If citizens knew that the Constitution vests control of spending exclusively in Congress, not the executive branch, they'd recognize that Trump's numerous orders withholding funding that was previously authorized by Congress violates the the constitutional separation of powers. They'd recognize that his Muslim ban was a flagrant violation of the First Amendment's religion clauses. And they'd understand that these various efforts to root out diversity, equity, and inclusion programs not only violate the free speech provisions of the First Amendment, but they're also unconstitutionally vague. You asked about solutions. If I had real solutions, I would be president. I don't know. But long-term, the solution is to require a much more robust civic education curriculum in the nation's schools. A curriculum that doesn't simply educate students about the Constitution and Bill of Rights, but also includes teaching accurate and inclusive history. You know, I went all through high school and college and never heard about the Trail of Tears, never heard about the Tulsa Massacre. And those are just a couple of examples. But if we make an effort to strengthen civic education, we come right up against the far right's determination to destroy public education, to use vouchers to send public money to overwhelmingly religious schools, very few of which, by the way, and I studied with a colleague on this, very few of those private religious schools offer civics or accurate in-depth history instruction. Such schools also reinforce those tribal identities rather than encouraging allegiance to overarching American citizenship. You know, the effort to replace America's public schools was set out in Project 2025, and this administration is clearly following along with the prescriptions of that document. Excuse me. In the absence of rigorous civics instruction, nonprofit organizations and media outlets can and should produce and disseminate documentaries and other educational materials. Unfortunately, so are propaganda operations producing very misleading materials. And actually, only the people who are actually interested in learning about their country's government are likely to consume those materials. And once again, they're likely to seek out those that reinforce their original biases. Reinvigorating the nation's public schools and requiring intensive civic education is really the most effective and, from my perspective, the only solution that I've been able to come up with.
Thank you, Professor Kennedy. Attorney Bolin, in your time as former president of the Indiana chapter of the NAACP, what are some of the greatest obstacles and challenges you met, encountered, or observed in Indiana? Can you please provide us with examples and, again, 10-minute limit, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You're doing an excellent job.
Thank you very much. I'm trying.
Please recognize that the things that the Indiana State NAACP has done was done through the collective work of the branch presidents, college chapter presidents, youth council presidents, and the members who work under their leadership, along with community and civic partners throughout the state. I have to recognize my state president of Indiana now, the Indiana State Conference, Ms. Sadie Harper Scott, who hails from Lafayette, Indiana, via North Carolina. The state conference is thriving under her leadership. The cornerstone of the NAACP civil rights agenda includes education, Brown versus Board of Education, environment, and voting rights. I turn my attention first toward voting rights. And an example of our work that I'm so proud of is the successful team, being a part of the successful team that challenged the closing of the early voting sites in 2008 in Gary, Hammond, and East Chicago. This was during the time when the law stated you could have satellite early voting sites so long as the election board unanimously agreed. And you could also have them without that agreement in courthouses. Well, of course, the Republican member of the election board did not vote in favor of voting sites in Gary, Hammond, East Chicago. And so that fight was taken to court. It was first taken to a superior court in East Chicago, where we received an adverse ruling, and it was appealed to the district court in Hammond. And what the district court did was it sent it back down to the state courts, and this time it went to a different superior court, and this time it was held in Hammond. I mean, excuse me, that was held in East Chicago, and it was from that judge that ruled that because Gary, Hammond, and East Chicago each had their own individual courthouses in Lake County, that those early voting sites could continue, and they would continue to this day because, again, the laws have expanded. But that fight again took three different courts to come up with that ruling that kept the voting sites open in Gary, Hammond, and East Chicago. Now, the second one that I'm very proud of was that there was a team of attorneys that prevented the closing of the 4D court that was housed in Gary back in 2013. The juvenile court built a brand new facility, and where did they build it? They built it out in Crown Point, which made it very difficult for people to get out there. There was no public transportation, which there's a little bit now, to get out there. But the 4D court specifically assisted lower income people in obtaining support for their children. And for them to move that 4D court, the sole 4D court, out to Crown Point was going to render an extreme hardship for low income people. We challenged the suit, the juvenile court judge, and that was successful in maintaining that 4D court in Gary. There is still a 4D court in Crown Point as well, but that Gary court still remains in Gary to this day. I want to talk about a little bit before our environmental work, and I want to talk about the situation that was happening in East Chicago, Indiana. they were at the height of facing an environmental crisis where authorities told the children it was not safe to play in their yards due to the fact that a closed industrial plant had been leaking toxins into the ground, and where they actually built a low-income housing project on top of that. Nobody knew about it. They hadn't shared that information with the public. One of the things that NAACP did to mobilize in that area was to, one, pass out healthy food to the residents. The other thing that we did, which I'm extremely proud of, and certainly under the direction of our environmental person, Denise Abdul-Rahman, was that she helped put together a youth scientist project where they brought in students from IU Bloomington to show children how to test the air and the water around their homes. We gave them testing kits. Then they brought them back to a central location. They were showed how to test them. There was a group of students that were shown how to record the data so that they could be reporters and report out the findings. And that was a hugely, hugely successful project. So those are three things that we've done here in the state of Indiana that was enormously successful and impactful.
Thank you, Attorney Boland. And to round it up, we're going to go to Professor Brown. Professor Brown, your primary research has involved race, law, education, transnationalism, and inequality. What are your thoughts on the impact of DEI regarding civil rights and rollbacks? In your experience, how long do you think it will take us to regain the momentum after the rollbacks? And in your opinion, what exactly will it take? And of course, you have 10 minutes.
Let me first start by I'm glad you're giving me 10 minutes because this is going to be really a complicated thing to address. The first thing I want to say is with respect to regaining the momentum to go forward, it is possible that the 2026 election can be at least stop the bleeding election. Now, I don't normally try to be really partisan. I try to be more neutral, but the Republican Party is not the Republican Party of your father or your grandfather. The Republican Party is a pro-Trump MAGA movement. And if the Republicans are in the same position in 2026, the bleeding is just going to continue. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to be able to roll things back or regain momentum. That's a much more complicated question. And for me to do that, I'm going to have to take a little time to explain this. And keep in mind, I'm a law professor, so that what I tend to do is focus on the impact of the law on our thinking about race and underrepresented minority groups. And when you look at what is happening, because what we've seen is a historic change, right? We've seen in almost overnight an American society going from being concerned about systemic racism for underrepresented minorities to now believing that no, the victims of race are really the dominant group, not the underrepresented minorities. Typically, when you have this kind of a fundamental shift in race, you can trace it back to a U.S. Supreme Court opinion. And let me just give you a couple of quick examples. 1857, the Supreme Court renders opinion in what's known as the Dred Scott case that finds that Black people, slave or free, cannot be citizens of the United States. That means that we cannot take any claims to the federal courts. That decision also reinforced and reaffirmed the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act. And what the Fugitive Slave Act basically said to northern states that had long since abolished slavery was that you have an obligation to return escaped slaves to the South. So for the Northerners, it meant you are now being asked to participate in enslavement by the South, even though you object to it. So the things that you're seeing in terms of mass protests against undocumented immigrants being seized by the federal government, this was also going on in the 1850s only there the people who were being protected by these protests were free Black people. And of course, that decision, the Dred Scott decision, is one of the causes of the Civil War in 1860. There's another Supreme Court case, an 1876 Supreme Court called U.S. versus Cruikshank. In this case, the Supreme Court overturned the convictions of 4 white individuals who were part of a mob that murdered 200 Black people who were engaged in a political protest. And what that did was sent the signal that the Supreme Court was not going to protect the voting rights of Black people. So after that decision in 1876, by the time you get to 1900, all Black males had been pretty much disenfranchised throughout the former states of the Confederacy. 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson is the case where the Supreme Court upholds separate but equal, with an understanding that equal doesn't really mean equal, it really means separate. And most Americans don't realize this, but in the 1890s, in terms of legal segregation, the only legal segregation statutes that existed were in transportation and primarily in the train industry, locomotives. After the Supreme Court's 1896 opinion, by 1915, segregation has spread everywhere. It's in schools, it's in hospitals, it's in prisons, it's in cemeteries. It's literally cradle to the grave. On the positive side, think of the 1954 decision in Brown versus Board of Education that Attorney Bowling referenced, that was very much driven by the NAACP, and virtually every Black person who has any significant professional position owes it to the NAACP. But that was an opinion that struck down segregation statutes and sent America into the desegregation era. So all of our desegregation of our schools, our colleges, our universities, our neighborhoods were being driven as a result of this Supreme Court decision. In the summer of 2003, the US Supreme Court upheld affirmative action by specifically talking about the benefits of racial and ethnic diversity. What the court said in that 2003 opinion was that racial and ethnic diversity in higher education promotes cross-racial understanding, helps to break down stereotypes, and enables students to better understand those from different races. But they went on to say that diversity makes American businesses stronger. They're better able to compete in the global marketplace. It helps to ensure that the citizenry trust our leadership because they see that the path to leadership is open to all people of racial and ethnic backgrounds, and it improves the performance of the military. So after that 2003 decision, we see a spread of DEI throughout the entire country. Well, when you talk about the anti-DEI movement that's been going on really for the past year and a half or so, accelerating once Trump got into office, you go back to the summer 2023 decision by the Supreme Court striking down affirmative action. That is, striking down the use of race and ethnicity in the admissions process of selective higher education programs. And this opinion was, everyone knew it, going to devastate the number of Black and Latinx students who are enrolled in our selective higher education programs. Now, the opinion itself applied to admissions. And I think there's a legitimate argument that it would have also applied to minority scholarships. But the Trump administration has used the ambiguity of legal decisions to push that decision to attack all DEI programs. Now, the decision itself would not have impacted Latino culture centers, Black culture centers. It would not have attacked Black student unions, Latino student unions, as long as those facilities were open to everyone. But the Trump administration is attacking those. And it's unclear if it would have applied to faculty, but it doesn't matter now. The Trump administration is applying it to faculty. And keep in mind, we have never seen the federal government pulling back grants from colleges and universities, and they're doing it because they disagree with the colleges and universities' DEI programs. So it's accelerating the dismantling of DEI programs that really, if you think about it, these things took 10, 20, 30 years to build up, and they're being dismantled overnight. So when the question comes, how do we now regain the momentum? Well, it's far more complex than just simply saying, let's change out the Trump administration, because you would still have to change the personnel on the US Supreme Court. Right now, we have 6 conservatives, 3 liberals. And of those 6 conservatives, the oldest of them are Clarence Thomas at 77 and Sam Alito at 75. So at the minimum, you'd have to have them come off the court. You'd have to have a Democrat in office who would appoint new justices that would be more favorable to the rights of underrepresented minorities. And it's going to take at least 10 years before they both come off the court, maybe longer. And then, as I said, you have to have Democrats in office. Whether or not that happens, I don't know, but that's at least a 15-year period. And on the rollbacks, and maybe let me just leave with this last point, because this is really a significant point, because you remember back in 2016, February 2016, Justice Antonio Scalia unexpectedly died. Now, from the time Richard Nixon put 4 justices on the Supreme Court in his first term in the early 70s, we've been dealing with a court that's been majority conservative with respect to the rights of underrepresented people, basically 5-4. Scalia's death opened up the possibility that Obama would get an appointment to the Supreme Court that would literally change the court from conservative to liberal. Now, understand, most of us as scholars would clearly agree we're dealing with the most conservative Supreme Court since the 1950s. Some will go all the way back to the 1930s. But that moment there in 2016 was the chance to change the direction of the court. And as you may recall, Mitch McConnell did not even give a hearing to Obama's Supreme Court nominee because he knew of the significance. That kicked it to the 2016 election that let Trump come in, replace that justice, and quickly got 2 more. So he's appointed 3 justices who are among the most conservative justices when it comes to issues of underrepresented minorities that we've seen. So sort of in short, for the next 10 to 15 years, we're really trying to preserve as much of the gains as possible. And if we're really talking about the momentum, and I know Attorney Bowling has an optimistic scenario because she's mentioned it to me, and that is Democrats get in 2026 and 2028. We have a Democratic House, Senate, and president, and they pass legislation that expands the number of justices on the court from 9 to 13. And now by appointing 4 liberal justices, you now have a 7 liberal, 6 conservative majority. I understand that. I see it as a potential possibility, but imagine what that kicks off. It means that for the highest court, when the Democrats get in, they'll pack the court. When the Republicans get in, they'll pack the court. And it means that we'll be looking at politicization of our entire legal system, which don't get me wrong, that's going on now. There's no question about that. But it then becomes a really, really troublesome cycle. So I would say maybe not pulling back momentum, but if you want to stop the bleeding, the 2026 election is the place to do it. And that makes sense because in a democracy, the power is in the democratic process. If you are not participating in understanding who these people are you're voting for and what they are doing, you are contributing to the very problem that you want to solve.
Here.
Thank you, Professor Brown. Attorney Boland, did you want to expand or expand on what Attorney Brown has said? Professor
I
Brown,
said ditto.
Professor Brown has said?
I say ditto.
Ditto.
Yeah.
3 dittos.
Okay, thank you very much. This concludes our first round of panelists. Professor Sheila Schultz Kennedy, Professor Kevin Brown, and Attorney Boland. I would like to thank you very much for, there was one, and I think there was one question about how can federal, the question is gone now, but I think the question was, how can federal employees speak out? Okay, for the panelists, as a local governmental employee, how do you continue to speak out for civil rights when it's seen as a threat to your community's federal funding? That's a jump one. Anybody can take that one.
That
Wow.
a terribly difficult issue, because what we're seeing right now is an effort to strip us, all of us, but especially government employees, of their First Amendment rights. And the only thing I can say, and you come up against what Professor Brown has eloquently explained about the Supreme Court, but certainly the lower courts have been willing to weigh in on the side of the Constitution, and a lot of local government officials who have been sanctioned for expressing opinions have gone to court and sued and won. And I guess that's my only suggestion.
Yeah, let me, and I'll just add to that. There was a 2006 Supreme Court opinion that basically said if you are a state employee, when you're engaged in your state employee activities, you do not have free speech rights. That doesn't mean that you don't have them outside of employment, which you clearly do. But we're watching an unprecedented attack
Yes.
on people's free speech rights. When I'm looking, although to talk about the courts for just a second, I understand the confusion. You have a U.S. Supreme Court that has rendered some major reversals of very long-standing constitutional doctrine, and to be worried about the law itself shifting is a very legitimate concern. Not only do we have the abortion decision, but we also have the affirmative action decision. We have a decision that was decided a couple of months ago, the Mahmoud case, where the Supreme Court found that if you object to your children in public schools being exposed to positive images about gays, lesbians, or transgender individuals, you have a free exercise First Amendment right to have your children opted out. Now, for public schools, this is going to be an administrative nightmare, but it also limits the ability to really try to portray some of these other people as at least the kind of lifestyles that one ought to tolerate. After all, I understand religion is important. I understand how important it is for so many people. But our society is more than just religious people. It's other people who have very different beliefs, and they have to be respected. But that question is now being raised as to how far do your religious rights go? And quite frankly, one of the things I've been concerned about for some time is that some religions build into their religious beliefs racial discrimination. I'll go back to before the 1970s, but the Mormons, for example, used to believe Black people didn't have souls. Now, if you have a free exercise right not to have your child exposed to positive images about gays, lesbians, and transgendered individuals, what happens if your religion has these negative connotations about people of color? Do public schools have to really accept that? Um, so, I guess I'm saying I am very concerned. I'm concerned not just about our political system, but very much about our legal system, and very much about the dismissal of what is the only constraint on the Supreme Court, and that's precedent. That's prior Supreme Court decisions. Once the Supreme Court says we are no longer bound by prior Supreme Court decisions, they have ultimate authority because they're the ones that interpret the Constitution.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I just wanted to say that Indiana passed that law, which allowed parents to opt out of certain lessons in the public school. We had already done that here in the state of Indiana, and it is disruptive. But from my perspective, I look at it, it all based upon the fact that other people were teaching their children one thing in their homes that was contrary to the truth. And when they went to school and interacted with people with other children of different race and religions, and they found out that, that Black people didn't have horns as their parents told them that they did, and tails, then they realized and they looked at their parents and said, "You've been lying to us." And that has been the impetus, I believe, of all of the things that's happening nowadays. It's like we're going to change the narrative because our children are now believing this, which is true. They're believing the truth, and we can't have them believing the truth. They must believe what we teach them at home. And so now they've got to learn that same thing when they go to school, even though it's a lie.
Well, that is actually, Attorney Bowling, the root of this incredible effort to destroy public education, because the public schools are where diverse people come together. And I'm Jewish. I was told in early by a friend in school, "Is it true that Jews have tails?" I had to look. I didn't think so. Your analysis is dead on, because in the public school system, people get together and they learn that we're all human and we come in various shapes and sizes and colors and whatever. But if you can destroy that public school system and make sure that everybody gets our tax dollars to send kids to schools that inculcate what those parents have been telling them, then what you end up with, of course, is a fragmented and very unhappy society where one's personal identity supersedes a common American identity. And that's where we're heading right now.
Yeah. And I just want to jump in and co-sign Professor Kennedy's opinion. We are headed towards tribalism within public education, if it exists. And that's one of the other problems. Well, if it just simply becomes tribalism, right? I will be fundamentalist Christian. I'm over here. I'll be Catholic. I'm over here. I will be Black. I'm over here. I'm Latinx over here. Why then would taxpayers actually pay for public school? Because the whole point of public schools was to educate all of our citizens so that they would have the value structures necessary for all of us to live together in some form of harmony and peace. If that's no longer the case, why am I paying my taxes? And think about, in the state of Indiana, half the taxes you pay are for public schools. Why pay those? And that's a real threat to public education, because the tribalism undercuts the very rationale for the system.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Professor Kennedy, Professor Brown, and Attorney Bowling. A little housekeeping: you guys are welcome to stay. You will have to turn off your monitors. I'm sorry, turn off your cameras and mute your phones if you microphones if you wish. Otherwise, we'll be taking. I'd like to thank you again from the Indiana Consortium of State and Human Rights Agencies for your time that you spent helping us explore the various topics that we explored this morning. Now we will take a 10-minute break, and when we return, we'll be joined by former mayor of Gary and first African-American female mayor in the state of Indiana, Karen Freeman-Wilson, along with a member of the ACLU, Laura, Laura Forbes, and Vanessa Allen McLeod of the Northwest Indiana Urban League, and Professor Louis Fuentes Rohr from the from the Indiana University. The break time will be from, I will have to confer about this because we're a little ahead of schedule. So I don't know if we're going to start back up at 11:30 or not. I need help from my vice president.
All right, Ron. Let's go ahead and go on break and I will touch base with those panelists. Thank you.
Okay, so we're on break until further notice. Thank you.
Make sure my phone is muted.
Thank you very much. We apologize for the haphazardness of our breaking time, but unfortunately, we did not time out the responses that we were getting. And so we're going to get back together. It is 20 minutes after the hour. And I would like to thank everyone for coming back to the Indiana Consortium, Upholding Civil and Human Rights in Indiana and the Midwest. This is a discussion brought to you by the Indiana Consortium of State and Human Rights Agencies. It is we now turn our attention to the second round of paneling. Joining us here is the former mayor of Gary and the first African-American female in the state of Indiana, Karen Freeman-Wilson. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
From the Indiana ACLU, Laura Forbes. Thank you for attending. And Dr. Vanessa Allen McLeod of the Northwest Indiana Urban League, and we do not have the professor. Is that right, Hanifa?
Here's the professor.
Oh, there's the professor. And Professor.
My apologies. He should be joining now. There we go.
I see him now.
Okay.
And Professor Luis Fuentes Rohr. And thank you. First, before we get started, I would like to thank everyone for joining us. These are important issues. I am the treasurer of the Indiana Consortium of State and Human Rights Agencies. And also, my name is Ronald Mullins, and I should reintroduce myself because I'm a brand new panel, and you don't know who the heck I am. But anyway, my name is Ronald Mullins. I'm the chairperson of the Hammond Human Relations Commission, and also I'm the treasurer of the Indiana Consortium of State and Human Rights Agencies. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to come and speak to us on these very, very important matters in this very important time in our country and also in our state. I will now, would you please provide a brief introduction of yourselves? And as I said to the last panel, I have gold stars, which I handed out to them virtually. And also you have certain amount of time to give your presentation. If you go over, you will hear this bell. And this bell comes from the Polar Express that I took my godson to in Chicago. This is all I got out of the deal with this bell. And so basically, I would ask you to be mindful of people's times. I know you have a lot of information that you want to share with us. You have very important information, but please be mindful of the other panelists' time. And I did not have to ring the bell for anybody on the first panel. That's why they all got gold stars. And hopefully I will be able to give you gold stars. And also Hanifa has asked us, who is our vice president of the Indiana Consortium of State and Human Rights Agencies, or the Indiana Consortium to be shorter, to make sure you mute your mic when you're not speaking. So at this time, would you please introduce yourself? It's a jump ball. Whoever wants to start first can start.
Hi, everyone. By the way, Ron, you haven't used the bell yet, like you said. We're going to test it. So we're going to see what happens.
Don't test me now. Don't test me.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Luis Fuentes Rohr. I am a professor at the Maurer School of Law in Bloomington, and I am the class of 1950 Herman B. Wells Endowed Professor. I was thinking of our coach, football coach, Signetti. For anything else you want to know about me, you go ahead and Google me, because we have way too much to talk about, and Ron's not giving us enough time. So for now, all you need to know, I was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which is really the only thing that I think you ought to know at this moment. Anyway, thank you, everyone. Thank you for hosting, Ron, and the consortium. I really look forward to our conversation. And thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Professor. Next.
Good morning. I am Dr. Vanessa Allen McLeod, President and CEO of the Urban League of Northwest Indiana. And this year, I celebrated my 15th year being President and CEO. I serve on a number of boards throughout the community and on a local level. And right now, I'm going to agree with Professor Louise. If you want to know anything else, just Google me. You may find out that every now and then you'll find me singing in church, or you'll find me singing the national anthem at certain events. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Forbes. I'm the communications manager for the ACLU of Indiana. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here today. So I've been in this role for a little over a year now, and what a year it has been. And so, yeah, my work is just to communicate with all of our various audiences across the state about what we do, our positions on issues, how folks can get involved. I'm a Hoosier native, born in Muncie, actually. Started my career as a news reporter in a few different markets, including Evansville. So I've kind of been all over the state and just kind of moved to the other side of the camera after Evansville. And I've been working in communications roles since then. You can Google me, but there's a lot of Laura Forbeses out there, so that may not do you much good. So I'll just go ahead and give you that background.
Thank you very much, Ms. Forbes. Mayor Freeman.
Good morning. My name is Karen Freeman-Wilson, and I can't tell you how excited I am to be on today for a number of reasons. First, you have assembled a group of esteemed panelists, and so it's an honor to join them. The other reason is that from 1989 to 1992, now I know I sound like a fossil, I was a member of the consortium as the director of the Indiana Civil Rights Commission. So this is a full circle moment for me, and it is an honor to be here with the members of the consortium. And I'm just going to leave it at that. You've told them that I was the former mayor of Gary, Indiana. And if I tell them anything else, they'll think I can't keep a job.
That's not true. Okay, let's get started. Let's get started with Professor Prentice Rohr. We'd like to open the second panel with the history of civil rights and legal history. In your experience, could you provide us with a brief timeline and your opinion for how far we have come since 1960 and what challenges, if any, you see ahead? Again, please limit your remarks to 10 minutes. You don't want to hear the bell. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. Not that I don't trust you, but I'm going to keep my own time over here.
I got one right here too.
In case. Again, I am Luis Fuentes-Rohr, professor of law at Indiana University Maurer School of Law. I teach and write in the areas of legal history. So the panels such as this one, the first thing that comes to mind is, how did we get here? What happened before? And how do we get out of it? Assuming the things that we're talking about are not things that are pleasant or things that we'd like to see in the world. So that said, I have 10 minutes. So in my time, I am looking back to our present moment within US history. Often you hear that we're back to the 1950s, that 2025 is basically us going back to the 1950s. And on that point, I could give you many examples, including the words of President Trump himself. I am here to tell you that is not quite right. And if you want to call it, it's just wrong. We're not back to the 1950s. In fact, we're in the late 19th century. If my talk, in fact, had a title, the title would be The Constitution of 1898. In my time, and remember, I have 9 minutes, I am doing 3 things. One, I want to show you the point about the similarities between the 1890s and the present time. And trust me, once I'm done telling you, they are really, really strong. Second, I want to show you when the 1890s changed and why. And I'll do that quickly, but because you know that story. And that story is, of course, of the 1960s. And then third, whatever time I have left, I want to tell you about, very briefly, what we're seeing today, how you make sense of it. So first, let me go back. because that's the easy part. Go back to the late 19th century, and I'm going to give you 6 data points. One, tariffs. Now, this is McKinley and the Tariff Act of 1890. Tariffs were all the rage back in 1890. They're all the rage today. And that I'm going to leave that there because that's not the topic of our panel, but that's just a really clear point of comparison. 2, immigration policy. Immigration at this time in the late 19th century was an issue. It was a reality. It was a problem. It was an opportunity. Pick one of those, but it was there, front and center, back in the late 19th century. Ellis Island, you may know, opened in 1892. To give you a sense, moved back 10 years from 1890 to the 1880s. 1882 is the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was enacted in 1882, and it lasted until about the 1940s. If I had time, I'd show you some popular cartoons from the time. So I don't have time, so I won't do that. But what I will do instead, I will tell you to go look up Puck Magazine, P-U-C-K. 2 in particular, go look them up. One is called Looking Backwards. It might shock you, but maybe not. Another one is called The High Tide of Immigration. They are, to put it bluntly, arresting. So that's 2 data points. Third, this is a moment of territorial expansion. As the United States ran out of land to annex back in the late 19th century, early 20th, what it did was it looked abroad. And you may know this, and I know you do. We had a war, the Spanish-American War in 1898, which the U.S. won, and winning it meant they could buy the Philippines for $20 million, which is, if you're wondering, it's about roughly $800 million today, depending on the calculator that you use. That same war, during that same war after it, Spain ceded, meaning it gave up, Puerto Rico and Guam. This is also, at this time, American Samoa. This is the Virgin Islands a little later, and this is, of course, the Mariana Islands. Now, you may know where this is going. This may be Canada. This may be Greenland. Who knows? This may be Mexico. And I'm going to let that sit there for you to think about. 4, this is the debate over birthright citizenship. The case was Wonkemark, decided in 1898. That is the case, you may know, that held that anyone born in the United States is a U.S. citizen under the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court has a case this term that will test that proposition. A case that will test whether the children of undocumented people are U.S. citizens by birth. Most scholars that I know say yes. We should not be surprised if the U.S. Supreme Court gives a different answer. That's 4. 5, this is Jim Crow and racism. In 1896, you may know, the Supreme Court decided Plessy versus Ferguson. That is a separate but equal case overturned by Brown. In 1901, the Supreme Court decided the insular cases that you probably haven't heard of, cases that understood the people of these 2 territories, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, Cuba, and so on. The people who lived in those new territories were understood as savages, uncivilized, as lesser beings. I should tell you, these are the people I knew as my great-grandparents. And here, I don't want you to miss that point because it really is arresting. A few weeks ago, the Supreme Court decided Vasquez, in fact, it didn't decide, it was a shadow docket. It was not an emergency hearing. It was actually a full decision on the merits, but it issued an opinion or a ruling in the case of Vasquez Perdomo, a case that allows ICE to detain people based on their ethnicity. Basically, if you look Latino, if you speak English or if you speak Spanish or, and this is a quote, accentuated English, if you are present at a particular location, like an agricultural site, and you're doing a particular kind of work, if those things are true, or some other thing, because we really don't know what the limits are, you are, and I quote here from Sotomayor's dissent, you are fair game to be seized at any time, taken away from work, and held until they provide proof of their legal status to the agent's satisfaction. They could just round you up because you're sitting somewhere looking Latino, speaking in Spanish, and going to do a certain kind of work. This is something. I'm going to leave it at that. Again, late 19th century to this moment. 6, this is the Mississippi Plan of 1890, which began the process of removing African Americans from the voting rolls across the South. This is a moment, 1890, when we begin to see poll taxes, literacy tests, understanding tests, character tests, and restrictive residency requirements. we also begin to see grandfather clauses, white primaries, violence, intimidation, and so forth. Congress tried in 1890 to pass a law known as the Lodge Bill of 1890 to enforce the 15th Amendment. That bill passed the House and it failed in the Senate. In 1903, the court took up the idea or the argument that the states couldn't disenfranchise Black people. The Supreme Court in Giles versus Harris was not interested. So here's a quick reminder. We have tariffs, immigration, expansion, Jim Crow racism, citizenship, and voter suppression. As I said, we need to think about not 2025 or 1950, but the Constitution of 1898. That's my first point. Then second point, when did this Constitution of 1898 begin to change and why? That I know you know the answer. The world changed in the 1960s. The civil rights movement changed the world. Think about all the things that had to happen for this to occur. And I don't want to patronize anyone in this call, in this webinar, but here's a refresher. This is Freedom Summer, the sit-in movement, Freedom Rides, Birmingham, Montgomery, Selma. This is Fannie Lou Hamer, Rosa Parks, Ella Baker. These are people on the ground. Bob Moses, Dr. King, John Lewis, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Jose Chacha Jimenez in Chicago. This is Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. I mean, I could go on. The Delano grape strike in California, the United Farm Workers. This is the Young Lords in Chicago. This is real people on the ground mobilizing for change. These are not people on their computers clicking likes on Facebook, right? That is the point. This movement led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Immigration, just to name a few, by the way, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. I know you know all of those things are now under threat, all of them. But just the point of my second point, this is how change happens. People on the ground causing it to happen. That's the way it's always happened, and that's the way it's going to happen moving forward. I have a minute left, according to my watch. So let me just offer my third point very quickly. What are we seeing today? What we're seeing today is a retrenchment. The arc of the moral universe does not bend towards justice, unfortunately. It is not even an arc. It's a pendulum. This moment where we are today is a reminder of that. The gains of the 1960s that I just described very briefly are all under threat. Think about all of them, or the ones that you have in mind. Affirmative action, voting rights, fair housing, employment discrimination, Brown versus Board of Education. All of those are under threat. Look no further, if you need to look any further, than the debate, which is not really a debate anymore, over DEI. Whatever your views about it, what DEI is, what it may be, where it came from, what you're seeing today should not surprise you. The attacks on it are what you would expect from a retrenchment, because this is, again, the 1890s, and because history is, after all, a pendulum. And with that, I will stop until I get to speak again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis Fuentes. Thank you for your words. The next question is going both to Karen Freeman-Wilson and Vanessa Allen McLeod. You're both current directors of the National Urban League in Indiana and Illinois. The National Urban League is one of the most leading civil rights and urban advocacy organizations in the United States. Can you expand on the purpose of the organization, the challenges, and discuss the most recent declaration of a state of emergency declared by the organization? Again, 15 minutes. Oh, wait a minute, this is not right because I can't get 15 minutes. 15 minutes each for your remarks. Thank you very much for your time. Whoever wants to go first.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, thank you, Karen Freeman-Wilson, my sister, for allowing me to go before you. The truth about it is this evolution of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees that all people are treated equally by the law. I'm confident that you would agree that all people want to be treated fairly, and this amendment is designed to make fairness a reality. However, achieving fairness for all is a challenge in this country of people with multiple races, ethnicities, religions, sexual orientation, and various other differences. Some of these differences are subject of political ideology, which often negatively magnify our differences. When our differences are used in negative ways rather than positive, the probability that all people will be treated fairly is significantly compromised. Fundamental to the challenge of achieving fairness for all is the reality of bias. Our biases, which are typically developed at an early age, are our personal preferences and worldview that inform our perceptions. These perceptions, if left unchecked, can lead to bias and prejudicial thinking. So here we are, representative of the National Urban League, where our headquarters is in New York. We were founded in New York in 1910, and we have continued to move forward to provide opportunities for people who have been significantly underrepresented. So since the occupancy of the current White House administration, there's been a full-on assault against diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Every effort is being used as a weapon to perpetuate misunderstandings, misinformation, and resentment. Recently passed federal and state legislation is dismantling structures and programming that have supported diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for years. These laws have been based on the false assumption that DEI is about giving people of color an unfair advantage rather than being based on merit. There's also a faulty belief that DEI is primarily about race, which is quite the contrary. DEI initiatives are far-reaching, touching the lives of many from different backgrounds and circumstances, and supporting equitable access to resources and services. In short, doors to opportunities that were once barely opened or closed swung open thanks to DEI initiatives. So the Urban League of Northwest Indiana, we are an example of how DEI inclusion works to have a positive impact here in Northwest Indiana. We provide a number of services that's open to Lake Porter and LaPorte counties and to all people. Diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts have always been about providing a pathway for those who have been historically and or systematically denied access to opportunities. When we strategically and equitably invest our resources and support in neglected spaces where human potential can be effectively nurtured, we invest in human capital, which is a key resource in supporting the collective health, well-being, and quality of life for all. It is a space where everyone is seen, everyone is valued, and everyone is included. So in light of this assault, the National Urban League recommends that the acronym DEI no longer be referenced due to the political landscape that we're dealing with right now. Instead, the recommendation is to spell out and pronounce words rather than using the acronym. Doing this will help keep the focus on its meaning: diversity, equity, and inclusions. So as I end my presentation, I just want to personally say we are in crisis, and that is why the National Urban League presented its state of emergency. We are definitely in crisis. Some have said a lot of things. However, the results of a 2024 Pew Research Center survey reported 52% of surveyed American workers believed focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace is good. So we need to continue to speak up and speak out and make sure that we're able to encourage each other, because when we are together with our differences, we're stronger in order to move forward this community. People are hurting, people are nervous, people are scared, and it's up to us as leaders to continue to keep hope alive and continue to speak up when we have opportunities such as this. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Dr. Allen McLeod. Thank you for your words. And at this point, we will look at Karen Freeman-Wilson for her response.
So first, I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Allen McLeod, for really outlining the work of the Northwest Indiana or Urban League and the National Urban League. I want to just put a fine point on the historical significance of the league, because the league grew out of, and this is the National League, grew out of the migration of Blacks from southern cities to northern cities. And there was a need for people to be acclimated. And the point of me saying that, or my purpose for saying that, is that there was a need for the Urban League, the National Urban League, which started in New York, and all of the Urban League affiliates, and there are 93 of us now, that exist throughout the United States. And the same reason that caused the Urban League to grow and to come into existence is really the same reason that we see the Human Relations Commissions, the Civil Rights Commission, the ACLU. It is out of a historical challenge that you have heard from Professor Fuentes. We didn't just see these organizations come into existence because everything was going well. It is established out of 400 years of discrimination, bias, ill treatment. And in order to address that treatment that really has come from slavery and the biased treatment, not just of Black Americans, but of Native Americans, of Latino Americans. There is of Asian Americans. If you look at every ethnic group and in many religious groups, when you think about Jewish Americans, when you think about those who are Muslim in our country, there has been an effort to treat all of these entities, all of these groups as other, and not just other, but less than. And so you've had to have law after law, ordinance after ordinance, whether you're talking about the civil rights acts that were passed right after the abolition of slavery, whether you're talking about the civil rights acts that were passed during the civil rights era that were referenced earlier, whether you're talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, or some of the more recent efforts to regulate behavior. There has been a need, and accompanying those laws has been a need for organizations like ours to advocate, to really work towards the enactment of those laws, and to give life, quite frankly, to those laws. And it hasn't become easier. Certainly there were times when folks understood the error of their ways and did in fact want to be allies and want to ensure that those pieces of paper lived up to the promise that was written on them when they were passed. But it has always required people, not just organizations, because organizations are made up of people, and it's required people like those of us on this screen and those of us who are attending, those of you in the consortium, to ensure that we are able to breathe life into the statutes that we're talking about today. And that is even now more important, because there are intentional efforts to ensure, one, to ensure that those laws don't realize their true meaning, but also to turn the meaning of those laws on their ear. When you see an effort to overturn affirmative action use the 14th, the 15th Amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, then you know that we have come to a sad state in this country. And I think it's imperative. It might be expected, but it's imperative that we call out every effort to utilize and misuse the laws that were meant to protect people who had been treated as essentially property, as not being meant in the way that it's being used right now. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson. Thank you for your words. And at this point, we're going to look at Laura Forbes. With your time with the Indiana ACLU, when it comes to the area of civil rights in Indiana, what do you see as the organization's top priorities? What do you see as the civil rights agency's challenges? And how does and one other thing, how does the purpose of the organization align with those challenges? And please, again, 10 minutes.
You got it. You got it. Yeah, so let me start with just kind of laying out the ACLU, because you mentioned, the purpose of our organization. And I think some people are more familiar with some of the aspects of what we do than others. So we really work to stand for civil rights on many different fronts. So, we have our legal team, which I think is the thing that people think of first when they think of the ACLU. It's certainly what we're in the news for most often is, the lawsuits defending civil liberties. We really don't do like criminal law. We really focus on when the government is infringing on the civil liberties of Hoosiers. Then we also have our policy work that we do, which is really sometimes direct communication with Indiana lawmakers to educate them on where we stand on the issues, to talk about the importance of civil rights in Indiana, and really monitoring bills during the legislative session as they are moving through. And my work in communications is, letting people know, updates and getting people involved when we need to be defending civil rights. And then we have our advocacy, which is really, working with a lot of volunteers throughout the state, to get them active. It's really boots on the ground, working with other organizations, going to community events throughout the state. So we have a number of different fronts where we're really working on civil rights issues. And we are a nonpartisan organization, and of course part of a national organization. So a lot of the stuff that is happening, at the federal level, we have our national organization fighting on that front. Of course, that does affect us many times in Indiana, but we're kind of here fighting the Battle of Indiana at the ACLU of Indiana. As far as our top priority, it's really difficult to name just one because so many things are under attack right now. And that is really intentional. I've been learning a lot about a term called democratic backsliding. And that's one that I haven't heard before. And I think, when I thought about, losing democracy, I think I always thought of it as very, you have a democracy or you don't, and there's a clear kind of a line and everybody agrees what it is. And it turns out it's a little bit more murky than that. But at a minimum, we are experiencing democratic backsliding right now, right? And there is someone named Hardy Merriman, who is someone that, folks might want to Google that name as opposed to mine, and learn about his research. And he's studied over 100 years of data on democratic backsliding that has happened in other countries. And one of the things that he says is anti-democracy forces are often not good at defense. So they will try to preoccupy you and exhaust you with offense, right? And that is what we're seeing, just, this just constant bombardment of so many different civil liberties kind of all at once. The ACLU is fighting on all of those fronts somehow. we were really, I would say, made for this moment. We've built up our strength along with, so many other organizations. So, if I had to pick a top issue, it would almost kind of vary from week to week, right? So like this past week, First Amendment, freedom of speech has been so much on our minds, both nationally and locally. We've seen the attacks on Jimmy Kimmel's show, right? And it's not about Jimmy Kimmel, right? It's about our freedom of speech. And, our national organization really rallied around that. Here in Indiana, we just announced earlier this week that we are suing the president of Ball State University for firing an employee for a post on Charlie Kirk, because that is a First Amendment, violation. So that has just been so much on our minds this week. obviously immigrants' rights is just huge right now. Professor Fuentes, you touched on birthright citizenship, very much on our minds. We had, Constitution Day recently, annual kind of event, and we did 2 videos of supporters across the states, reading the First Amendment and the first kind of paragraph of the 14th Amendment, because those are so much under attack right now. I will tell you, our national executive director is more optimistic about the birthright citizenship case. But I totally understand why others are not, because we have seen so many bad decisions come out of this Supreme Court. But I'm certainly hopeful that they will do the right thing on that one, because it's just crystal clear. There's really no ambiguity on that one. Of course, the other thing with immigrants' rights, again, locally here in Indiana, we know that Miami Correctional, is going to be used as a detention center. And, here you have a maximum security prison that is going to house people for what is essentially a civil offense in most cases. It's just totally inappropriate. So we're working really closely with other organizations that fight for immigrants' rights to push back on that. So, there are those things that are really top of mind right now, but we continue to fight for, LGBTQ plus rights, reproductive rights, privacy, criminal justice reform, voting rights. I mean, the list goes on. We're fighting it on all fronts. And these have really been issues here in Indiana for so long. We've been fighting those issues, and they're now, it feels kind of more of a nationwide struggle, but we are here to fight for all of those freedoms.
Thank you very much, Ms. Laura Forbes. Now we are coming to a section of our presentation, our discussion, our panelists, in which we're going to ask for each one of your opinions. In each one of your opinions, what role do you see voting playing in the area of civil rights? Is voting under attack? Excuse me. And what specifically do you see as your organization defending the right to vote? And this is going to be a jump ball. Don't put your shorts on and start going down the court. But if you could just tell us what you think, limited to the 10 minutes, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Whoever wants to start first can start first.
Yes, voting. Our voting is under attack. It is our responsibility to get the word out about the importance of voting, because people feel that, some people feel that their vote is not important. But when you don't vote, you're really voting. And people don't understand that. When you don't vote, you're really voting. So our organization, Urban League of Northwest Indiana, we're going to have a voters registration site here in our office. And we're also dispatching voters registration teams to our events. We have an event that's coming up tomorrow. It's our annual scholarship fair, where we will have about 1,000 students from Lake Porter and LaPorte County coming to attend. From what I heard from our legislators, that students that are in college cannot use their student ID as a form of identification in order to register to vote. This just came out. So we have many students that are away in college that we're concerned about. However, those students that are coming tomorrow that are of voting age, we're going to have on-site voters registration there to register those high school seniors before they leave, going to the college or university of their choice. We also need to utilize our pulpits, our churches, our other community centers to make sure people know where to vote and how to vote, meaning where to vote, where's your precinct, What is the location? What is the address? What are the times? So we need to utilize all of those strategies and opportunities to make sure people are aware and informed, because we're also dealing with redistricting in our area. It's just a lot of, should I say, hateful strategies that's coming to us, but we can rise above that and we can get in front of that if we make sure people are informed. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a monumental leap forward, but its true promise is realized when we continue to expand equity and inclusion, not only a moral imperatives, but pillars of a thriving, resilient democracy. And the only way we can do that is to make sure people are informed and people understand that it's for such a time as this, we need to think about what our ancestors did years ago and how they continue to march, fight, organize, plan, and then take action. And that is something that we all should do, I believe, in our agencies. Thank you.
I would just ditto what Dr. Alan McLeod said about the importance of registration and voter turnout. I would also underscore that we do that in the Chicago Urban League in a variety of ways. We have a voter guide very often for every election, because if you don't know what your candidate stands for, then it just becomes a popularity contest. So it's important that we get as much information to the voters. We are one of the consistent sponsors of candidates, not just forums, but debates in partnership with television studios, both ABC7, NBC, Telemundo, WVON, a variety of stations and organizations, because we want folks to be able to get the information how in a way that they can receive it most comfortably. We also do text to vote, meaning that if a person wants to know their voter location, because registration is useless unless people are actually showing up to the polls. So whether it's early vote information or whether it is election day information, it's essential that people show up to vote. The other thing that I will say is that we have seen nationally an attack on voting. We saw that most recently in Texas. They are talking about it and will likely have some legislative activity around it in Indiana, and that is around redistricting. And that is an all-out assault on voters, on the ability to vote. We know that the Voting Rights Act has on occasion been used to address unfair voter lines, unfair districts, unfair ways that they not only draw congressional districts, but also state, Senate, and state rep districts. And there has been an effort to undermine that. And so to the extent that we need to ensure that voters turn out, if there is an effort to educate voters and get them out, then people will be less likely to use voter districts and the way they draw districts as a weapon to ensure partisanship in representation.
Thank you.
I'll just go ahead and jump in, agree with everything that has been said, and Dr. Ellen McLeod, I love what you said about not voting is voting, and that's so true. My dad used to say when I was growing up, he would say, "One must choose, one has no choice, for not to choose is choice itself." And he said it so often it's stuck in my brain, and I found it really annoying as a kid, but it is absolutely true, right? And we have such low voter turnout in Indiana, and that is just really not a good sign. And there are so many different reasons for that. You mentioned registration. We have such an early deadline to register to vote, so you've got to get out there to register new voters, really early in the process. And then there's the time between that and then getting them to the polls. It's been mentioned the, student voter IDs, which is one of the most recent attacks in Indiana on our voting rights. And again, we talk about registering to vote. Previously, students at state schools at least could bring those IDs to the polls as their identification, right? And that's what that law is meant for, and we're against those laws as well. But the idea is that you are identifying who you are, not proving your residency. You do that when you are registering. So there's absolutely no need for those types of laws, and it's just really discouraging. But we just keep fighting that front. And one of the things that we do is really informing people of their voting rights as much as we can. We have a Yes You Can Vote campaign where we really try to reach out specifically to groups that are very much underrepresented. That includes students. It includes people who have been incarcerated, because a lot of people think in Indiana that you lose your right to vote if you have been convicted of a felony. But the reality is, the minute that you leave prison, you get that right to vote back. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. So we try to educate people on that, and we're going to be working really hard as we're approaching the next election to get people to recognize that they need to get out there and exercise that right. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying to take it from you.
Thank you, Ms. Forbes. Professor Luis Fuentes.
Yeah, let me just very quickly add to what has been said, with which I agree. The question reminds me, on the conversation, remind me of a story I read long ago when I was doing research, in fact, on the Voting Rights Act. I was in the archives and I found a letter from Thurgood Marshall to the civil rights groups, and the date was late 1965, early 1966. And right after passage of the Voting Rights Act, which is August 6, 1965. You would think, after passage of the historic Voting Rights Act, that our collective work in the country was done, that we could then move on to other things. Now, people would just show up and vote and do the right thing, and things would just go on the way we expect them to. Instead, Thurgood Marshall, then Solicitor General, he called civil rights leaders to his office in the White House. To ask them, to tell them, to explain to them, to exhort them to do what was necessary moving forward. Basically, he was saying, we just passed a Voting Rights Act. Now we need you to do your work. Mobilization, registering voters, right? Doing the things that need to be done on the ground so the law will become what it needs to be. That reminds me of this conversation when you say, well, what should we all be doing? That's a piece that we forget too often, that we think laws are passed and then we declare victory and go home. I mean that, of course, collectively. Rather, laws are just, I think of them as tools by which we can get what we want. But laws by themselves don't do everything we want them to do. And that in voting, nothing is clearer. When it comes to voting, so many moving pieces, so many burdens, so many rules, so many, right? Voting, if you think about it, it's a cost and a benefit. And if the cost outweighs the benefit, voters will not turn out. If benefits outweigh the cost, then voters will, of course, in fact, turn out. If I asked you, what is the biggest suppressor of the right to vote? I imagine most people would not know. And it's because it's so innocuous. You would say, well, literacy tests or character tests or whatever, all the things that we've heard of throughout history. Turns out the biggest suppressor is registration laws, something that Laura said, right? We make them so early at a time when you're not thinking about it. You don't even know that you need to register, perhaps. You come from a state like Minnesota where you could just do a day of election and then you show up to vote here in Indiana. You say, well, you should have done it long before you had any idea. Just recently, we just passed more stuff. We're always doing stuff under the guise of I think we call it, and I quote, voter fraud, which doesn't happen all that often. So then when we catch somebody, because I'm sure somebody's doing it somewhere, then great fanfare. Then we announce it to the world. See, we were right. We caught one over the last 25 years. What we don't say is the cause those rules exact on voters, or the way that we make it harder for people to do all the things they need to do so that they can vote. That to me is the tragedy, irrespective of your views, political or otherwise. The idea that we raise the bar so high. So when we say in Indiana, people don't vote, well, of course they don't, because we make it way harder than it needs to be. If we just very quickly, Ronnie, we just flipped it. Rather than this negative right to vote, like it's a privilege and you get to earn it, perhaps. Let's call it a universal right, a positive right that belongs to you as a citizen. Heck, belongs to you as a person, by the way. You may know, pre-1925, non-citizens in this country, in some states, were allowed to vote. But this is a new thing. Speaking of the 1898 Constitution that I spoke of earlier, right? This is a new thing. Yeah, it's 100 years. But the idea that voting, taking part in democracy, who participates, we make it so hard. We elevate the cost so high that when we get turnouts as we do, we should not be surprised. And that, to me, that is the shame. That rather than make it easier, we make it harder. Not we in Indiana, but pretty much generally. Few states do it any different. And that's too bad.
Thank you, Professor. I have the final question for all of the panel. In each one of your opinions, what role does your organization outside of local government, such as yours, play, or how important are these organizations in advancing or facilitating civil rights advocacy in Indiana? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, in my community, the Urban League serves as a resource center for people to call and come in when they are looking for anything, housing, security deposit, they're looking for a job, they're homeless. We are the center agency that tries to provide services to those who are in need and also advocate for those who feel they have no voice. So we stand ready to provide whatever we need to do to make sure people are informed, they are aware of their rights, and if we don't have the information here, then we reach out and we partner with other organizations so that people will feel valued and they will be empowered to move on. So we are an advocacy, we are a do tank, we are action-oriented to make sure that our citizens are well informed and that they have a sense of being while we live in these challenging times. Thank you.
Likewise, so I would say that we not only have a responsibility, but we have a unique opportunity. And that is, one, to make sure that people are educated and that they get the right information. There's so much bad information out there. You could work all time or full time, just making sure that people have the right information. So we want to do that. But in addition to getting the information, we have to galvanize the groups that are out there who want to see different things happen in our communities to make sure that we're working together, that we're not, one group over here and another group over there, but we're working in concert, because I think when groups work in concert, you have the opportunity to ensure that not only do people get the right information, but they act on that information, and that the forces that are really against the public good are defeated. And that's our job. I mean, we can't call it anything else but ensuring that the forces of evil are defeated.
Thank you, Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson. Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I would just say, certainly you can't just count on the government to uphold your rights. And that certainly obviously is true right now, but it's always been true. I mean, the ACLU has been around for over 100 years for a reason, because, as Professor Fuentes, alluded to, these fights have been going on for a long time, right? And so organizations are critically important, and we, as I mentioned before, work together with organizations, really big on kind of coalition building. But I think also the thing to keep in mind is we need people power. Now more than ever, and to just encourage everyone who is watching this to get involved in this fight for civil liberties. And it can feel overwhelming, but just doing what you can do. The thing that I mentioned about democratic backsliding is one of the things that we hear is, public opinion is not a guardrail, but public mobilization is. So getting involved in any way that you can pick, one civil right that is most important to you, or one organization, or you can, run the gamut. But just everyone can do something to get involved in this moment. So I just encourage everyone, go to our website, aclu-in.org. Follow us on social media at ACLU Indiana, and keep up to date with what we're doing and how you can get involved. During the legislative session, we put out action alerts regularly where people can just very easily, with a few clicks, contact their representatives, their legislators who work for us. Let's keep that in mind. So there are a lot of different ways to get involved, and I just encourage everyone to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Forbes. Professor Louis Fuentes, please.
I mean, the point is the one I made before that Laura just hit it again, which is political mobilization is key. Again, we don't think about that enough. And so when I think about the ACLU, when I think about the NAACP, the Urban League, when I think about the 60s and SNCC and the SCLC, when I think of groups that have made things happen, right? The goal is, one, to change the law. But then once we do that, the next goal has to be mobilizing voters to do that which the law now lets them do. And I couldn't underscore that enough. And that's always been true. I mean, you think about when the NAACP began, this is right after or right during Jim Crow in the early 20th century, and the Urban League as well. Right? They began with a purpose in mind, which is thinking about and fighting against the things that were happening in the world that were that needed to be changed. And in the end, I was a little bit flip when I said people think mobilization today means just going on Facebook and liking things. That's not going to do it, unfortunately. And so it changes, whatever change is going to happen, it will happen by people. It's always been this way. People mobilizing with other people, joining forces, people, and this goes for, I think about very quickly, this is not, I want to be really clear, not a partisan point. It's just a point of fact, a historical point. Think about when Lyndon Johnson wins the 1964 presidential election, the biggest landslide in US history. Who would have thought in 1960, now, of course, there's Vietnam, of course. But think about what happened in 68, then Nixon. Then as Kevin told you in the earlier panel, the Nixon court happened by 1973. The Warren court, now that's a tricky, interesting story. I'm not in any way trying to trivialize it. But from 73, which is the year of Roe versus Wade, by the way, to this moment and Dobbs and all the things that happened in between, that didn't just happen organically. People mobilized to make that happen. That's the story of change, period. So that if you don't like what you're seeing, whomever you may be, there's a path. And it's not going to be sitting at home on Facebook or whatever it is that you're doing now. Probably I'm old because I'm saying Facebook. There's probably other things that TikTok, I think it's the one. But that's not going to do it, unfortunately. So that's this meeting, these amazing group of people, they are the way forward. I think there's no question about that. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for the panelists and for carrying this forward. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was our final question. We are a bit ahead of schedule, so if anyone wanted to have any final remarks, you can feel free to do so.
Thank you so much for inviting me to serve along with these distinguished panelists to share some information. If anyone is interested in coming to our Leadership Empowerment Luncheon, it will be held on November 18th at the Avalon Manor in Maryville, Indiana at 11:30. And we will be having Bishop Douglas Sparks, who is our Northern District Bishop here in Northwest Indiana. The last word that I would like to say is we can have these panel discussions, but the work comes in action. We're really going to have to make ourselves a little more proactive in reaching out to those people that may not listen to this webinar, who may not have access to social media. So let's think of other strategic ways. And I'm so glad that we have a group of Urban League young professionals. Those are the age between 21 and 40. We can utilize them in other proactive outreach strategies, because they have the technology down to a science where they can reach that age group, because we need them to get out and vote and share information. So I will place our website information in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you. Anyone else? So basically, I would first like to thank our Vice President of the Indiana Consortium, who organized this event. She worked very, very hard. Hanifa is her name, and she worked very, very hard at getting everybody organized. I'm just a cog in the wheel. I just read my script and go home. But anyway, she was the one that spent the thankless nights and days trying to get this organized. She did a very, very, very good job. I wanted to say thank you to her for doing that and giving me the opportunity to present the panel to everyone who's on it right now. Oh, there she is. And
Thank you.
also, my script tells me to tell you guys not to go anyplace right now, because even though we're closing out, we have a word from our president of the Indiana Consortium of State and Human Rights Agencies, Yvonne Thompson.
First of all, thank you, all of you. What a wonderful gift you have given us in sharing the information and expertise that you hold And we just appreciate you guys so very much. And like Mr. Mullins had mentioned, I'm the president of the Muncie, I'm the president of the Indiana Consortium, and also director of the Muncie Human Rights Commission. I am very thankful for the insight you've shared. And as we've come to the close of this insightful panel discussion, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for your participation and engagement. First and foremost, a special thank you to our panelists for their unwavering leadership and vision. Your dedication is inspiring. Thank you for giving us hope to carry on and to do this work. Thank you. I'd like to also thank the Gary Human Relations Commission, the Hammond Human Relations Commission, and also the members of the Indiana Consortium. Thank you to all of you and all of us for what we're standing for. And Mayor Karen, you put it so well. We're here to stand against the forces of evil. I mean, that's really the bottom line. Stand up for the truth. Stand up for what's right. And so in these trying times for all of us, but as a collective, we are going to remain strong as we continue to serve the public. So if you or anyone that you know or someone that you know has become a victim of discrimination in Indiana, contact us at indianaconsortium.com and we will help direct you. You may also visit indianaconsortium.com to donate. And once again, thank you so very much for tuning in. We appreciate the hope that you've given us. Thank you.
That concludes our panel discussion for today. I would like to thank all the panelists for sharing with us their time. I would like to remind everyone that a rebroadcast of this panel discussion, both the panel discussion this morning and this afternoon, will be available on indianaconsortium.com, indianaconsortium.com. Thank you very much. And without any further ado, I will bid everybody a good afternoon. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, that's over.